My name is Dr. Alistair Finch. It is imperative that I document these events, not for posterity, nor for any grand scientific archive, but as a warning, a stark, undiluted account of the malevolence that resides in this desolate expanse of white. I am, or perhaps was, a climatologist. Part of the international research contingent at the Amundsen, Scott South Pole Station. My credentials, I assure you, are impeccable, or at least, they were before the unraveling began. Before the ice whispered secrets it should have kept buried. Our mission, ostensibly, was to study the long-term effects of climate change on the Antarctic ice sheet, to drill core samples, analyze atmospheric data, and contribute to the ever-growing body of knowledge about this frozen continent. We were a team of 12, a mix of seasoned veterans and bright-eyed newcomers, all vetted for psychological resilience as much as for scientific acumen. Antarctica, you see, is not merely a physical challenge. It is a crucible for the mind. The unending daylight of summer, the perpetual darkness of winter, the profound isolation, these things can fray the steadiest of nerves. But what I encountered, was not a product of sensory deprivation or cabin fever. It was something other, something ancient and profoundly, terrifyingly evil. The station itself is a marvel of engineering, a collection of modular buildings, elevated on stilts to prevent burial by drifting snow. It's a self-contained world, a tiny bubble of warmth and life in an environment actively hostile to both. We had laboratories, living quarters, a mess hall, even a small hydroponics bay for fresh vegetables, a luxury in this barren land. For the first few months, life settled into a predictable rhythm. Data collection, analysis, shared meals, the occasional movie night. The camaraderie was genuine, forged in the shared experience of existing at the literal end of the world. My specific area of research involved deep ice core drilling. We were attempting to reach layers of ice laid down hundreds of thousands of years ago, hoping to unlock atmospheric data from prehistoric eras. The drill, a colossal, whining beast of metal and hydraulics, was our mechanical proboscis into the deep past. It was during one of these drilling operations, approximately 3 months into our deployment, that the first anomaly occurred. We were at a depth of nearly 2 kilometers. The ice at this level is incredibly dense, compressed by the unimaginable weight of the glaciers above. The drill bit, a specially designed thermal unit, was struggling. The rate of penetration had slowed to a crawl, and the telemetry indicated unusual resistance. Dr. Lena Hansen, our chief geologist, and a woman whose composure I had always admired, was monitoring the readouts with a frown etched onto her usually placid face. "Alistair, take a look at this," she said, her voice tight. "The density readings are off the charts. It's like we've hit bedrock, but the seismic scans show at least another kilometer of ice beneath us." I leaned over her shoulder, peering at the flickering numbers on the screen. She was right. The resistance was immense, far exceeding anything we'd encountered before, even in sections known to contain cryovolcanic rock. Could it be a meteorite fragment? A large one, I ventured. Lena shook her head. "The magnetic signature isn't right. and it's too uniform. Whatever this is, it's smooth and vast. We decided to retrieve the drill bit for inspection. The process was laborious, taking several hours. When it finally surfaced, caked in a slurry of ice and rock dust, we noticed something peculiar. Adhering to the cutting edges were fragments of a material unlike anything we had ever seen. It wasn't rock, not in any geological sense we understood. It was black, obsidian-like, but with an organic, almost chitinous texture. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally so, even in the sub-zero temperatures of the drill bay. "What in God's name is that?" whispered Ben Carter, one of our younger technicians, his breath misting in the frigid air. Lena, ever the scientist, carefully scraped a sample into a sterile container. "I have no idea," she admitted, her voice betraying a hint of unease. "But I intend to find out." The initial analysis of the black material yielded more questions than answers. It defied classification. It was carbon-based, certainly, but its molecular structure was unlike any known terrestrial or extraterrestrial organic compound. It possessed an incredible tensile strength and an unnerving ability to absorb light, rendering it almost perfectly non-reflective. But the most disturbing property was discovered by accident. A small fragment, left on a stainless steel tray in the lab, began to resonate. It was a low, almost sub-audible hum, a thrumming vibration that seemed to penetrate deep into your bones. Dr. Jian Li, our physicist, was the first to notice it. He'd been working late, calibrating a spectrometer, when he felt the vibrations through the soles of his boots. He traced it to the tray. The fragment wasn't just vibrating. It was pulsing faintly, as if with a slow, deliberate heartbeat. When he reported his findings the next morning, a palpable sense of disquiet settled over the team. This was no longer a geological curiosity. It was something profoundly strange, something that hinted at the unknown, and in Antarctica, the unknown is rarely benign. We decided to halt drilling at that specific site and focus our analysis on the mysterious substance. Lena and Jian worked tirelessly, subjecting it to every test imaginable. The more they learned, the more unsettling the picture became. The material seemed to react to organic proximity. When Lena held her hand near it, the pulsing intensified. When she moved away, it subsided. It was as if it was aware and waiting. It was around this time that the dreams started. Or rather, the nightmares. They weren't the usual stress-induced anxieties of Antarctic life. These were vivid, intrusive, and deeply disturbing. I dreamt of vast, cyclopean structures buried beneath the ice, of non-Euclidean geometries that twisted the mind, and of a presence, an ancient, slumbering consciousness that was slowly, inexorably awakening. I would wake in a cold sweat, the low hum of the station's generators momentarily indistinguishable from the phantom vibrations of the black material. I wasn't the only one. Over hushed conversations in the mess hall, others admitted to similar experiences. Ben Carter described dreams of being lost in an endless, black labyrinth, its walls made of the same chitinous substance we'd found. Dr. Eris Thorne, our taciturn meteorologist, confessed to waking visions of shadowy figures flitting at the edge of his perception, just beyond the pools of light cast by the station's lamps. The official explanation, of course, was stress, isolation, the power of suggestion. Our station physician, Dr. Emily Carter, no relation to Ben, a point of mild amusement in happier times, prescribed mild sedatives and encouraged more group recreational activities. But her eyes, usually so full of professional concern, held a flicker of something else. Fear, perhaps. Or was I merely projecting my own growing dread onto her? The black fragment in the lab continued its silent, ominous pulsing. It became a focal point for our anxieties, a tangible manifestation of the unease that was slowly poisoning the atmosphere of the station. We began to avoid the lab, making excuses, finding other tasks to occupy our time. But its presence was undeniable, a brooding weight on our collective psyche. Then came the incident with the dogs. We kept a small team of Greenland Huskies, primarily for emergency transport and for morale. They were hardy, resilient animals, perfectly adapted to the harsh conditions. One evening, their handler, a grizzled Norwegian named Lars, reported that the dogs were agitated, whining and barking incessantly, refusing to settle. He'd found them, clustered at the far end of their enclosure, staring out into the white expanse, hackles raised, as if confronting an unseen threat. Lars, a man not easily spooked, was visibly shaken. "It's like they see something out there, Dr. Finch," he told me, his voice raspy. "Something that terrifies them." We went to investigate, armed with powerful searchlights. The night was clear, the stars blazing with an intensity only seen in the polar sky. The wind, a constant, mournful presence, sculpted the snow into eerie, shifting dunes. We swept the beams of our lights across the ice, searching for any sign of a predator, a rogue squaw, perhaps, though it was unlikely. There was nothing. Only the endless, featureless plain of white. But as we stood there, a profound sense of being watched crept over me. It was an irrational feeling, a primal instinct screaming of unseen danger. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, broken only by the distressed whimpers of the dogs. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the hairs standing on end. I scanned the horizon, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing to see. Only the ice, and the darkness beyond the reach of our lights. The following morning, one of the dogs was missing, vanished without a trace. There were no tracks, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the ice itself had swallowed it whole. Lars was inconsolable. The remaining dogs were subdued, their usual boisterous energy replaced by a fearful lethargy. The disappearance of the husky marked a turning point. The unease that had been simmering beneath the surface now boiled over into outright fear. The black fragment in the lab, once a scientific curiosity, now seemed like a malevolent idol, a conduit for the encroaching darkness. We were no longer just researchers. We were intruders in a realm that did not welcome us, a realm that was beginning to push back. And the ice, the ancient, silent ice, held secrets far more terrifying than we could ever have imagined. The evil was no longer a suspicion, it was a certainty. It was here, and it was aware of us, The disappearance of the husky, which we'd named Polaris after the North Star he so resembled in his steadfastness, cast a long, dark shadow over the station. Lars, his usual gruff demeanor shattered, became a ghost of his former self, moving through the corridors with a haunted, vacant stare. The other dogs remained listless, their joyful barks replaced by low, mournful whimpers that seemed to echo the ever-present moan of the wind outside. We held a small, somber gathering in the mess hall, a futile attempt to inject some semblance of normalcy. But the unspoken fear was a palpable entity in the room, cold and suffocating. Dr. Emily Carter, our physician, increased her rounds, her professional optimism wearing thin. She spoke of heightened stress responses, of the psychological toll of extreme isolation, but her words felt like hollow reassurances against a tide of encroaching dread. Even she, I suspected, was beginning to doubt the conventional explanations. The nightmares intensified, not just for me, but for nearly everyone. They were no longer fleeting images, but vivid, protracted ordeals. We dreamt of the black, chitinous material, now not just a fragment but vast, pulsating structures deep beneath the ice. We dreamt of impossible geometries, of corridors that twisted back upon themselves, and of a malevolent intelligence that was stirring, its awareness spreading like a contagion. Lena Hansen and Jan Lee redoubled their efforts to understand the fragment. They worked in shifts, their faces etched with fatigue and a grim determination. The lab, once a place of exciting discovery, now felt like a besieged outpost. The fragment itself seemed to grow more active. The pulsing became more pronounced. The sub-audible hum a constant thrum that vibrated through the very structure of the station. We began to experience headaches, a persistent, dull throbbing at the temples, especially when near the lab. One afternoon, while Lena was attempting to take a micro-CT scan of the fragment, the incident occurred that shattered any remaining illusions of scientific detachment. As the scanner's radiation bathed the material, it didn't just pulse, it writhed. A section of its surface, no larger than a thumbnail, seemed to liquefy and then reform, extruding a delicate, obsidian tendril that quivered in the air for a moment before retracting. Lena recoiled, a choked cry escaping her lips. Jian, who was observing from the control booth, stared in disbelief, his face pale. "Did you see that?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling. It moved." John stammered. "It responded to the radiation. The implications were horrifying. This wasn't just an inert, albeit unusual, material. It was reactive. It was, in some terrifying, incomprehensible way, alive. Or at least, it possessed properties that mimicked life in a way that defied all known biological or geological paradigms." The news spread through the station like wildfire, fanning the flames of our collective fear. The fragment was no longer an object of study. It was a threat. A heated debate erupted in the mess hall that evening. Ben Carter, his youthful bravado long gone, argued vehemently that we should destroy it, or at least attempt to jettison it far from the station. "We don't know what it is, or what it's capable of," he exclaimed, his voice cracking. "Keeping it here is insane." Dr. Aris Thorne, ever the pragmatist, countered, "Destroy it." How? We don't even know its composition fully. What if attempting to destroy it makes things worse? What if it releases something? Some kind of spore or energy? Lena, usually so decisive, was torn. Scientifically, it's the most significant discovery of our lifetimes. But ethically, I don't know. The risk is considerable. I found myself agreeing with Ben, a sentiment that surprised me. My scientific curiosity, once a driving force, was now overshadowed by a primal urge for self-preservation. "It's influencing us," I said, my voice low but firm. "The dreams, the headaches, the dogs. It's all connected to that thing. It's not just a rock, Lena. It's a presence." The station commander, a stoic ex-military man named Marcus Cole, listened to all arguments with a grim expression. He was a man of action, not debate, and the ambiguity of the situation clearly frustrated him. Finally, he made a decision. We secure it. Completely. Lead, lined container, far end of the storage module. No further direct experimentation until we receive guidance from McMurdo. We report this as an unknown biological contaminant. That should get their attention. The containment procedure was a tense affair. Dressed in full hazardous material suits, a precaution that felt both necessary and woefully inadequate. Gian and Lena carefully transferred the fragment into a specially constructed lead-lined box. Even through the thick gloves, Lena later reported feeling an intense, unnatural cold emanating from the material. As the lid was sealed, the persistent hum that had plagued us seemed to diminish, though whether it was a genuine reduction or merely the power of suggestion, I couldn't say. For a few days, a fragile sense of relief settled over the station. The headaches lessened, and the nightmares, while still present, seemed less vivid, less intrusive. We clung to the hope that containing the fragment had somehow severed its connection to us, or at least dampened its influence. It was a fool's hope. The entity, or whatever it was, didn't need the fragment to reach us. It was already in the ice. It was the ice in some fundamental, terrifying way. The first overt manifestation came during a routine maintenance check of the exterior sensors. Two technicians, Sarah Chen and David Miller, were working on an atmospheric sampling unit located about half a kilometer from the main station. They were in constant radio contact, their voices a reassuring presence in our headsets. Suddenly, Sarah's voice crackled with static, then cut out. "Sarah? David? Report." Cole's voice boomed over the comms. Only David's panic breathing answered. Then a garbled scream. It's not snow!" "Oh God, the ice. It's..." His transmission ended in a sickening, wet crunch. A rescue team, including myself and Lars, who, despite his grief, insisted on joining, was scrambled within minutes. We raced across the ice in one of the tracked vehicles, our hearts pounding with a dreadful premonition. The scene that greeted us was one of pure, unadulterated horror. The atmospheric sensor array was mangled, twisted metal jutting from the snow, like the bones of some prehistoric beast. Of Sarah and David, there was no sign. Only a large, disturbed area of snow and something else. The snow in that area wasn't white. It was infused with black, chitinous shards, identical to the material from the drill core. But these were sharper, wickedly edged. And the pattern in the snow, it wasn't random. It suggested something had erupted from beneath the ice, dragged them down, and then retreated, leaving only the disturbed, stained snow as evidence of its passage. Lars, his face a mask of fury and despair, let out a roar of anguish and charged towards the disturbed area, brandishing a heavy ice axe. "Lars!" I yelled, but it was too late. As he reached the edge of the blackened snow, the ice beneath him seemed to give way. Not a crack, not a fissure, but a sudden, silent subsidence, as if a trapdoor had opened. He vanished with a startled cry, swallowed by the white. We rushed forward, but there was nothing. The snow was undisturbed again, pristine and white, as if he had never been there. As if the ice itself was a living entity, capable of consuming and then healing its own wounds. Panic, raw and unreasoning, threatened to overwhelm us. Cole, his face ashen but his voice steady, ordered an immediate return to the station. No one goes outside alone. All external operations are suspended. We are on full lockdown. Back within the relative safety of the station, the true horror of our situation began to sink in. We were trapped. Trapped with something ancient, malevolent, and utterly alien. The lead, lined box containing the fragment now, seemed like a pathetic gesture, a child's attempt to ward off the dark. The evil wasn't confined to a small piece of rock. It was all around us, beneath us, an intrinsic part of this frozen hell. The communications array, our only link to the outside world, was the next to go. It wasn't a storm or a mechanical failure. One moment it was operational, the next, dead silence. When a team, heavily armed and moving with extreme caution, went to inspect the external dish, they found it encased in a thick, black, resinous substance, the same chitinous material. But this time it was almost pulsating, as if it were an organ of the larger entity, deliberately severing our connection. We were cut off, alone. 12 souls adrift in a sea of ice, hunted by an enemy we couldn't comprehend, let alone fight. The station, once a beacon of science and discovery, had become our tomb. The whispers of the ice were no longer subtle. They were a chorus of malevolent intent, promising a slow, cold, and terrifying end. The evil was not just here, it was ascendant. And it was hungry. The severing of our communications was the final nail in the coffin of hope. We were now truly, utterly alone. 12 of us, reduced to 9, after the losses of Sarah, David, and Lars. 9 souls clinging to a fragile metal island, in an ocean of sentient, malevolent ice. The station, once a symbol of human ingenuity and exploration, had become a cage. Its corridors echoing, with the silence of our impending doom and the phantom, whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Commander Cole, despite the grim circumstances, tried to maintain a semblance of order. He organized watches, rationing of supplies, though we had enough to last for months. The psychological comfort of control was paramount, and regular check-ins. But the strain was visible on his face, in the deep lines etched around his eyes, and the way his hand instinctively hovered near the heavy duty flare gun. he now carried at all times. It was a pitiful weapon against an enemy that could swallow men whole and disable advanced technology with contemptuous ease. But it was something, a symbol of defiance, however futile. The entity, as we had come to call it, seemed to be biding its time, toying with us. There were no more direct attacks like the one that claimed our technicians, but its presence was a constant, oppressive weight. The black, chitinous material began to appear in unexpected places inside the station. A thin, obsidian tendril snaking from a ventilation shaft. A patch of the glistening black substance spreading across a section of corridor floor, as if the ice beneath was bleeding through the metal. Each discovery sent fresh waves of terror through our dwindling ranks. Ben Carter, who had been one of the most vocal in his fear, became increasingly erratic. He claimed to hear voices, not just the vague whispers we all experienced, but distinct, articulate words spoken in a language that was both alien and chillingly familiar. He would spend hours staring at the walls, muttering to himself, his eyes wide and unfocused. Dr. Emily Carter tried to help him, offering sedatives and counseling. But Ben was slipping away, his mind succumbing to the insidious influence of the entity. One morning, the perpetual twilight of the Antarctic winter made such distinctions meaningless. Ben was found dead in his bunk. There were no marks on him, no signs of violence. He lay peacefully, a faint, almost serene smile on his lips. But beside his bunk, scrawled on the wall with a piece of charcoal he must have taken from the art supplies, was a single, horrifying symbol, a complex, spiraling sigil that resonated with the same non-Euclidean wrongness as our nightmares. It was a symbol we had all seen in our dreams, a hallmark of the buried city, a calling card of the ancient evil. Emily was devastated. Despite her medical training, Ben's death, so quiet and inexplicable, shook her to the core. It wasn't a heart attack, she whispered to me later, her voice trembling. His vitals were fine yesterday. It's like it just called him, and he went. The discovery of the sigil was a chilling revelation. It suggested a level of intelligence, of deliberate communication, that was far more terrifying than blind, predatory instinct. It was marking us. Or perhaps it was inviting us. Lena Hansen and Jian Li, the scientists in them still battling the primal fear, became obsessed with the sigil. They photographed it, analyzed its geometry, cross-referenced it with ancient mythologies and obscure occult texts we had access to on the station's digital library. They found unsettling parallels in tales, elder gods, and slumbering horrors from beneath the earth. It was all dismissed as fantasy, of course the ramblings of superstitious minds. But here, at the bottom of the world, with death literally seeping through the floors, those ancient tales felt terrifyingly relevant. The structure, John murmured one day, pointing to a complex diagram he'd drawn. It's a form of trans-dimensional mathematics. It's not just a symbol, it's a gateway or a key. A key to what, John? Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. To it, he replied, his gaze distant. To its understanding, or perhaps to its realm. The idea that the entity was not just trying to kill us, but to communicate with us, or worse, to assimilate us, was a new dimension of horror. We were no longer just prey. We were subjects of a terrifying, cosmic experiment. The station itself began to change. The temperature inside, despite the generators running at full capacity, started to drop. Patches of frost appeared on the internal walls, spreading like a creeping disease. The air grew heavy, stale, carrying a faint, metallic tang that reminded me of the black fragment. The lights flickered more frequently, sometimes dying altogether for minutes, at time plunging us into a terrifying, absolute darkness broken only by the emergency glow strips. During these blackouts, the whispers intensified, swirling around us, seeming to probe at the edges of our sanity. Dr. Thorne, our meteorologist, a man of quiet observation, was the next to succumb, though in a different way. He didn't die. He simply changed. He began spending more and more time at the main observation window, staring out at the desolate, ice-locked landscape. His eyes took on a strange, luminous quality, and he spoke less and less. When he did speak, it was in a monotone, his words echoing the chilling pronouncements of our nightmares. "It is ancient," he would say, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It is patient. It has waited for eons. We are but a fleeting distraction." One day, he walked to the main airlock, the one we had sealed after the communications array was destroyed. He began to manually operate the override controls. Commander Cole and I rushed to stop him, but he moved with an unnatural strength, his eyes glowing with that eerie light. "Aris, what are you doing?" Cole yelled, grappling with him. "I must go to it," Aris said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It calls to me. The symphony of the void. It is beautiful." He managed to activate the outer door sequence. A blast of super, chilled air and swirling snow filled the airlock. Before we could drag him back, he stepped out into the white maelstrom, a look of ecstatic peace on his face. He didn't even wear his cold, weather gear. He simply walked into the blizzard and was gone. We watched, horrified, as the ice seemed to embrace him, the snow swirling around him like a welcoming shroud, before he disappeared from view. We were 7. The station was no longer our refuge. It was a failing fortress, slowly being breached from within and without. The black, chitinous material was now a common sight, oozing from cracks in the walls, solidifying into sharp, obsidian spikes on the floor. The very geometry of the place seemed to subtly shift, corridors appearing longer than they should, rooms feeling off, their angles subtly wrong in a way that induced a profound sense of unease and nausea. Lena, Gian, and I clung together, our scientific training providing a fragile framework for our sanity. We theorized that the entity was a form of crystalline life, perhaps existing in a state of near zero entropy, and that our presence, our warmth, our very biological processes were an intolerable disruption. Or perhaps it was something far stranger, a being that perceived dimensions beyond our own, and we were merely blundering through its world. Commander Cole, Emily Carter, and the 2 remaining technicians, a quiet woman named Maria Sanchez and a burly engineer named Greg Mack, Macmillan focused on survival. They reinforced doors, checked weapons, and tried to maintain a routine, but the creeping dread was relentless. Mac started rigging explosives, muttering about taking the whole station down if it came to it, a final act of defiance. Maria, a devout woman, spent her time praying, her rosary beads clicking in the oppressive silence. One evening, as Lena, Gian, and I were huddled in the lab, which we had tried to fortify, poring over our increasingly desperate theories, the main power grid failed completely. Not a flicker, but a sudden decisive shutdown. The emergency lights, dimmer than before, cast long, dancing shadows. And then the humming started. Not the subtle thrum of the fragment, but a deep, resonant vibration that shook the entire station, a sound that felt like the planet itself was groaning in agony. It was coming from below, from deep within the ice. The floor beneath our feet began to tremble. Cracks appeared in the reinforced plasteel, and a fine, black dust, like pulverized obsidian, began to sift down from the ceiling. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a chorus, a cacophony of alien voices, promising oblivion and a terrible, beautiful union. Gian looked at Lena, then at me, his face a mask of grim acceptance. "It's decided, it's done playing," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "It's coming for us." The main door to the lab, which we had barricaded, began to buckle inwards, the metal groaning under an immense, unseen pressure. The black chitinous material was forcing its way through the seams, glistening like freshly spilled oil in the dim emergency light. This was it. The end of our research. The end of our lives. The evil was no longer just here. It was claiming its domain. And we were the final, insignificant specimens in its horrifying collection. The barricaded lab door, our last bastion against the encroaching horror, shuddered violently. Metal shrieked in protest as the black, chitinous tendrils, now thick as pythons, punched through the reinforced steel with sickening ease. They were not merely forcing their way in. They were disassembling the door, piece by piece, with a terrifying, methodical precision. The air filled with the screech of tearing metal and the acrid scent of ozone, mixed with that same faint, metallic tang we now associated with the entity. Commander Cole's voice crackled over the emergency comms, which were miraculously still functioning, albeit intermittently. "Finch! Lee! Hansen! What's your status?" "The main hall is compromised. It's everywhere." His voice was strained, punctuated by the roar of his flare, gun and inhuman shrieks that were definitely not coming from any of our crew. "We're being breached, Commander," Jen yelled back, his scientific composure finally shattering, replaced by raw, primal fear. He grabbed a heavy wrench, a futile weapon against the nightmare unfolding before us. "It's coming in." Lena, to her credit, was still trying to document. Her tablet was clutched in her trembling hands, its screen casting a faint glow on her pale face as she recorded the grotesque invasion. "The material, it's not just organic," she muttered, more to herself than to us. "It's reconfiguring, adapting. It's like a liquid solid, forming tools, weapons." Indeed, the tendrils were no longer just blunt instruments. Sharp, Obsidian blades extended from their tips, slicing through the remaining sections of the door, like a hot knife through butter. One of them, impossibly fast, lashed out towards Lena. I reacted on pure instinct, shoving her aside. The blade missed her by inches, embedding itself deep into a metal cabinet with a sickening thud. "We have to get out of here!" I shouted, grabbing Lena's arm.
"The emergency access tunnel! It's our only chance!"
The tunnel was a narrow maintenance shaft, designed for engineers to access the station's underbelly. It was cramped, dark, and likely infested, but it offered a sliver of hope, a desperate gamble. Jian nodded, his eyes wide with terror, but his resolve firming. "Go! I'll buy you some time!" He hefted the wrench and smashed it against one of the writhing tendrils. The impact produced a wet, tearing sound, and the tendril recoiled momentarily, but others immediately surged forward to take its place. There was no time to argue. Lena and I scrambled towards the access hatch at the far end of the lab. As I fumbled with the heavy locking mechanism, I heard Jian scream a short, choked off sound that would haunt my nightmares for whatever remained of my life. I didn't dare look back. The tunnel was even worse than I'd imagined. It was barely wide enough to crawl through. We soon discovered why. And the air was thick with the black dust and the oppressive, bone-chilling cold that was the entity's signature. The whispers were deafening in here. A symphony of madness that clawed at my sanity. I could feel Lena trembling behind me, her breath ragged. "Keep moving," I urged, my voice hoarse. "We have to keep moving." Behind us, we could hear slithering, scraping sounds. The unmistakable noise of the entity's tendrils, pursuing us through the narrow confines. It was a race against time, against an enemy that knew no fatigue, no mercy. Suddenly, Cole's voice, weaker now, crackled over the comms again. "Mac, he's set the charges. Main core. He's going to bring the whole damn place down. Get clear if you can." There was a burst of static, then silence. Mac, the burly engineer with his desperate plan. A wave of despair washed over me. If the station's core went critical, the resulting explosion would vaporize everything for kilometers. But it might also, just might, destroy the entity, or at least seal it beneath the ice once more. A Pyrrhic victory, if any. The tunnel began to slope downwards, leading, hoped, to an older, disused section of the sub-levels. Perhaps even to one of the original boreholes. If we could reach the surface, away from the main station complex. The scraping sounds behind us grew louder, closer. I could feel a cold breath on the back of my neck, a faded, alien stench. One of the tendrils, impossibly long and slender, shot past my head, its obsidian tip narrowly missing my face. It was toying with us, hurting us. Then, the floor of the tunnel ahead of us simply dissolved. Not a collapse, but a smooth, silent liquefaction. The metal and permafrost turning into a black, viscous ooze that swirled like an oil slick. We were trapped. Lena let out a sob of despair. "There's no way out, Alistair. This is it." I refused to give up. Not yet. My eyes scanned the darkness, searching for any alternative, any crevice, any hope. And then I saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer of light to our left, seeping through what looked like a crack in the tunnel wall. It wasn't much, but it was something. "There," I pointed. Together, we clawed at the crack, our gloved fingers tearing at the frozen metal and rock. The material gave way surprisingly easily, crumbling into black dust. Behind the thin partition was another tunnel, older, rougher, clearly not part of the station's original schematics. It felt ancient. As we squeezed through the narrow opening, the station above us was rocked by a series of massive explosions. The ground bucked and heaved, and the sound was deafening even down here. Mac had done it. He'd blown the core. The tunnel we were in now was different. The walls weren't metal. They were carved from the same black, chitinous material as the entity itself. And they were covered in the sigils, thousands of them, glowing with a faint, internal luminescence. The air was still cold, but the whispers had changed. They were no longer a chaotic cacophony, but a focused, insidious chorus speaking directly into my mind, promising knowledge, power, union. Lena stumbled, her hand going to her head. "Alistair, I can understand them," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a strange, dawning comprehension. "They're not just sounds, they're thoughts. A consciousness." The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, and in the center of the cavern, bathed in an eerie, pulsating light, was the source. It wasn't a creature, not in any biological sense. It was a colossal, crystalline structure, a latticework of black, obsidian, like facets that pulsed with an internal, malevolent energy. It was the heart of the buried city, the core of the entity, the ancient evil that had slumbered beneath the ice for untold millennia. And it was awake. Its thoughts flooded my mind, overwhelming, irresistible. Images of dying stars, of galaxies consumed, of civilizations rising and falling, all insignificant specks in its ageless existence. It showed me the true nature of the universe, a place of cold, indifferent forces and ancient, cosmic horrors, of which it was but one. It offered me a place in its grand, terrible design. I saw Lena, her face transformed, her eyes glowing with the same unholy light as Eris Thorn's. She was smiling, a serene, terrifying smile, as she walked towards the crystalline heart, her arms outstretched. "It's so beautiful, Alistair," she said, her voice a distant echo. "So complete. Join us, join me." A part of me, the exhausted, terrified part, wanted to succumb, to let go, to become part of that vast, ancient consciousness. But another part, the stubborn human part, rebelled. The memory of my colleagues, of their screams, of their sacrifices, fueled a desperate, defiant rage. I don't know where the strength came from. Perhaps it was the last vestiges of Commander Cole's indomitable will, or Mac's fiery defiance. I grabbed the flare gun from my belt. I'd forgotten I even had it. It was a pathetic weapon against a cosmic entity, but it was all I had left. "No," I croaked, my voice raw. "We are not just specimens." I aimed the flare gun at the pulsating heart of the crystal and fired. The flare, a tiny spark of human defiance, struck the crystalline structure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a fissure appeared on its surface, a crack in its obsidian perfection. The entity's mental scream was a physical force, throwing me backwards. The cavern began to shake violently. Chunks of the black material rained down from the ceiling. The entity, for the first time, seemed surprised, perhaps even hurt. The flare itself was insignificant, but the act of defiance, the unexpected resistance from such a primitive being, had somehow disrupted its ancient, implacable rhythm. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I scrambled back towards the narrow opening, dragging myself through the crumbling tunnel as the cavern behind me collapsed in a cataclysm of sound and fury. The mental assault ceased, replaced by a roaring silence. I don't know how long I crawled. Hours, perhaps days. The explosions from the station's self-destruction had likely sealed many of an exit. My body was battered, my mind teetering on the brink of insanity. But I kept moving, driven by a single, desperate thought. I had to warn someone. I had to tell the world. Eventually, miraculously, I saw it, a faint glimmer of natural light, a fissure leading to the surface. With the last of my strength, I clawed my way out onto the wind-scarred ice. The Amundsen, Scott's South Pole station, was gone. In its place was a vast, smoking crater, a gaping wound in the Antarctic ice sheet. Of the entity, there was no sign. Whether Max, desperate gambit, and my own pathetic act of defiance had truly destroyed it, or merely driven it back into a deeper slumber, I could not say. I am alone now, writing this account on the last of my tablet's battery. The cold is seeping into my bones. Rescue is unlikely, but I have to believe that this message will be found, that someone will understand. There is evil here, buried deep beneath the ice, an ancient, cosmic horror that dreams of consuming worlds. We woke it. We looked into the abyss, and the abyss looked back. Do not come here. Do not dig too deep. Some secrets are best left buried. Some doors are best left unopened. The ice remembers, and it waits.